Hello, everyone. Welcome to Google Developer Student Club, City University of Seattle. My name is Kim, and I'm GDSC CDU lead. And I'm here today with Alan. He is Google Developer Expert and who focuses on smart assistant, and that is going to be the topic we are going to talk about today. And before I pass it on to Alan, I just want to welcome everyone once again. Thank you for spending your time and joining us. And if you have any comments or if you just join, just leave us a comment. Let us know that you are here. Say hi, and we love any questions you have. Ellen, would you like to introduce yourself?
I've got the introduction as part of the presentation, so why don't we jump into that?
Absolutely. All right, so the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me and thank everyone for having me here. So, as you said, what we're going to be talking about today is why we need you, and I specifically mean you, to help us build smart assistants. So, even if you don't think you've got the skills, the knowledge to help do these sorts of things, you do. And I want to help you understand that you do and why we need you to be part of what I think is a really, really exciting set of technologies that are coming down the road. So let me tell you a little bit about myself first. My name is Alan Firstenberg. It is fantastic to be here. I am a software developer and consultant professionally. This is what I do, what I think of as my day job. So for my day job, I help companies understand these new technologies and how they use them and how they can help them make their lives better, make their customer lives better. I'm also what Google refers to as a Google developer expert. And that means I don't work for Google, but I work closely with them in a number of fields and with a number of technologies. And the technologies I mostly interact with Google directly are a bunch of them. So, Internet of Things, Google Workspace, what used to be known as G Suite, wearables, the identity services that they have. And what I love talking about the most, and what I'll be talking about today, is the Google Assistant. And I'm talking about the Google Assistant because I'm really passionate about what we refer to as voice technology or voice first technology. And as part of that, I engage in a lot of other things that are out there, which I encourage you to find later. And most of this you'll see as well on a later slide. So I'm also the co host of a podcast and YouTube channel called Two Voice Devs, where me and a partner named Mark Tucker, who is an Alexa champion, talk about voice technology and how voice technology works with Alexa devices and Google Home devices, and how the two are similar and how they're different, and how developers in particular can use these devices. I also hold weekly office hours on Wednesdays, and you can find my Twitter stream where I talk about them. And this is so that developers or people who are interested in understanding more about voice technologies can join and ask questions and kind of discuss what they see. And if they have problems, talk about their problems. But this is where we can all get together, discuss what we're doing, iron out problems, kind of bounce off each other where we are and what's going on. The rest is where you're going to be able to find me in the future. So professionally, my company's name is spiders.com. Great technology. I love working for them. It's a fantastic team. Prisoner.com is where I usually host most of my information. And prisoner.com/UBI for ubiquitous computing is where you'll find slides and presentations that I've done in the past, and probably this one within a few days. Finally, best way to get a hold of me, you can find me on LinkedIn as Alan Firstenberg, or Twitter at A Firstenberg. My direct messages are open, so feel free to ping me there or talk about it publicly, reply to a comment. I love to have discussions with people, and I strongly encourage you to find me there and to be part of the conversation, because being part of the conversation's what's really important. I love having conversations about this technology. So, what are we talking about today? Literally, why are we here? Why are we talking about this stuff? So, quite simply, we are talking about talking. We are talking about us talking to computers and the computer's talking to us. So voice is considered a two-way street. But why do we care about this? And part of why we care about this is, it's pretty cool. We see lots of science fiction stories, and it's great to watch in the movies having these computers talk to us. Everyone I talk with these days talks about how they love their own personal Jarvis, who is out there that they can talk with at any given time. Uh, when I grew up, it was the Enterprise's computer, and depending on who you talk to, maybe it's HAL 9000. But we all have this notion that computers should be talking to us and they should be listening to us. And there's something really, really cool about we can finally do that. So voice is cool, but voice is more than cool. Voice is a completely different type of interface than what we're used to. We're going beyond staring at screens. We're going beyond, keyboards and punch cards and scratching at glass. For the first time, we have an interface that is learning how we do things, where previously we needed to learn the commands. We needed to learn the keyboard commands. We needed to learn the gestures that we needed to do. For the very first time, we're having devices that need to learn how we speak, how we talk with them, how we communicate. And that's incredibly powerful. It's incredibly difficult, but it is incredibly powerful because it enables more and more people to be able to use computing devices than ever before. It's also incredibly personal. Voice is a very, very personal feeling, and people tend to have very personal connections to their voice devices. But also, it lets us do things in completely different ways. So we can do things more casually. We can do things in passing. We can do them as we're just walking through a room, or ask for information when our hands are full. So voice lets us do things at times in ways and in places that we never could before. And these are all really, really important things to learn, to understand, and I think to help everyone, most importantly. So mostly when we talk about voice these days, we're talking about smart assistants. And when I say a smart assistant, we kind of have this vague notion of what that might mean. But let's kind of narrow it down specifically. What do I mean when I talk about a smart assistant? Well, Google's definition for a smart assistant, or specifically what the Google Assistant is a conversation between you and Google that helps you get things done in your world. And I've highlighted two important elements to this. The first is that it can be a conversation. We're not necessarily just issuing commands, although commands might be part of it. So we may issue a command and get a response. But we may say something and the computer may need to clarify. It may need to ask follow-up questions. It may need to direct us down a conversational path. If we're placing an order for something, it may need to ask follow-up questions. So it's not just a command and response, which is what we're very used to when we're dealing with text user interfaces and graphical user interfaces pushing buttons. It can be more of a conversation. And finally, we need to understand that this is getting things done in our world. Previously, we've been doing things in the computer's world. We're doing things on our phones. We're doing things on our laptops. Now, for the first time, we've got the computer coming to where we are, in our kitchens, in our cars. This is kind of a role reversal. And I think it's very, very important that as we go forward, we keep this in mind, that we are meeting people where they are. We are trying to meet their needs. And the assistants that we are building are there to help us do this. And where are these sorts of things taking place? Well, conventionally, when we might think about where a smart assistant runs, we kind of are expecting things like smart speakers, like the Google Home, or smart displays, like a Nest Home Hub, or whatever the right name of it is these days. But increasingly, we're also seeing the assistant being used in more and more places. So we're seeing it used, for example, on our phones. All Android phones have the Google Assistant built right into it. We're seeing it in our watches, where more and more we can have these conversations take place on the watch itself. And then we start seeing in some really exciting places. So, for example, we're seeing it on our TVs. So now we can carry on conversations trying to find a show to watch or asking more about the shows that we are watching. We're seeing it in cars so that as we are driving, we can have conversations about the navigation that we need to do. We can ask for where is the nearest gas station. We can ask it to play different music for us. So increasingly, we're not just seeing the assistant in small, dedicated pieces of hardware, we're seeing it incorporated into everything that we're doing. And there are a bunch of different terms for this. Sometimes we call this ambient computing. So it's computing that's just there. It exists in the world and we can tap into it. Sometimes we call it ubiquitous computing. So it's computing that is there when we need it, but it's out of the way when we don't. And that's an important thing to understand, is that voice is not something that is invasive. It's there when the user needs it, when they ask for it, or when they're expecting something from it. And otherwise, it takes a step back. It's a little bit out of the way, and that's okay. These are important roles and important things that we're doing with voice. So sounds really exciting, and I hope you're really excited about this sort of thing. So the next question is, how do we build for the Google Assistant? Google refers to these things as actions. So actions are the APIs, or action on Google is the APIs that let you engage in conversations with other services through the Google Assistant. And again, I kind of want to emphasize three important points here. And I hope these points kind of get you thinking that these are not as difficult as you may think. So that the first is it's an API. As developers, we understand APIs. We know what APIs are. These are things that are familiar to us already. Even if we don't know a specific API, we know API concepts in general. So it's not too hard to learn what a new API is going to look like. Again, these are conversations that are taking place. So the APIs are helping us carry on these conversations. And that's a really, really powerful thing, that we don't need to invent the conversations from the beginning. We don't need to invent all of the tools to do this. There are APIs out there that are helping us with these conversations already. And finally is the fact that these are other services. So Google is not providing every service that is out there. Google is providing a way to get access to the services that you are delivering. And those services may be ones that you deliver now through a web page, or through an Android app, or through any of a number of other means. You may be providing an API as a service. So now this is a way that we can tap into all of those things that are already existing out there with some new APIs that give us that kind of access. And what we're going to be talking about in a bunch of these bulleted points, as you can see, is how each of these different fields that are already used to conversations with APIs for their services, how you'll be doing this with voice. So let's start doing them one by one. So first is you Android developers out there. One of the first things I see a lot of people thinking is, great, how do I talk to my apps? How can I have my apps talk back? So the great news here is that Google is putting a lot of work into Assistant for apps with something that are called app actions. And app actions, the support for them is increasingly built right into Android, just like the Assistant is increasingly built right into Android. So what you're able to do is invoking apps and some of the intents that you have in your app directly from an invocation. So you could say something like, hey G, ask my app to do something. Like, hey G, start a run. These additional things, the start a run is what's known as a built-in intent, or a BII. And there are over 60 of these BIIs that are phrases, sometimes with additional parameters, that you can say, that you can have your app register for to listen to. So if you are building a health app, for example, you might listen to a number of phrases about health and fitness if they make sense for your app. If you're doing something with food ordering, you might listen to a bunch of phrases along the lines of I want to order a pizza, or where is the nearest pizza place, or things like that. So right now, apps that you already have or apps that you may want to build that are doing these sorts of things can listen for these built-in intents. Furthermore, when you're building things for your app, such as Android shortcuts and Android widgets, and these are standard Android shortcuts and standard Android widgets, these are things that exist in Android now and have existed for years. Soon you're going to be able to link up voice commands to those shortcuts and widgets. So now widgets that appear on your home screen or widgets that appear on your Android Auto car dashboard will be able to be voice activated and will be able to be voice interactive. So not only are you saying things to trigger things, they will be able to invoke responses, and you can carry on conversations through those shortcuts and widgets. Excuse me. So, okay, that's good for Android stuff. What about for things like smart speakers and smart displays? For those, we have what are known as conversational actions. And this is where you cloud developers will want to be listening, because conversational actions work by taking the information that a user says to a speaker or smart display, converting that into text, and then identifying what kinds of intents that may invoke, what sorts of things the user will want to do with it, and then send that to your action. Now, where does your action live? Well, it lives in the cloud. So in this way, your smart speaker or smart display is kind of acting like a browser. It contacts your cloud service running as a webhook. It's going to send you a JSON bundle. You process that however you want, and then you reply with a different JSON bundle. And if that sounds familiar to you as a cloud developer, it should, because that's what you're doing now in a lot of cases. So again, this is using technologies that you should already be very familiar with. Now, things are different sometimes with voice. One of the big constraints that we have is we need to make sure not just that we give a good result, but that we do it quickly. Usually the stuff that we need to reply with, Google likes us replying within 5 seconds. So you can't spend a lot of time thinking about what the result is going to be. You need to get it out there, and you need to get it out there quickly. And that changes in some ways how we're going to create our responses, how we're going to design it. We'll get to some of that in a second. Now, I can sort of see web developers going, well, wait a minute. If, I've got a speaker as my browser or a smart display as my browser, what role am I playing here? So the good news here is that Google's introduced something called the interactive canvas. And this works on smart displays and on Android and provides what we call a multimodal experience. So not only is there going to be voice input and voice output, but we'll be supplementing that with visuals and with touch controls. And how do those visuals and touch controls get implemented? Well, they get implemented with HTML and CSS and JavaScript exactly as you know them today. So your skills as a web developer can now be enhanced by adding voice to them. So you can take the skills that you already know, whether you know Angular or React, or however you're developing your web apps today, you can now add the interactive canvas library to them, and they will work on smart displays and on Android through the Google Assistant. So this lets us add some rich visuals for a multimodal experience to supplement the rich audio that we have coming in with the Google Assistant now. So some really powerful tools that are there that web developers can tap immediately into. The interactive canvas has some great stuff that's out there, some great tools that support it, and there are more tools that are on the way to even push things more locally. so the responses get even faster. So I'm sure the machine learning people have been listening to all this and going, oh, so there's text to speech and there's a conversation going on, so that needs to sound kind of human. We need to, lots of stuff that's in there, speech recognition, all sorts of exciting stuff that I can get into with my machine learning models, and all of this. And some of that is true. There's some great development that's going on with next generation conversation stuff. So next generation conversation models to determine what responses are going to be and how users are talking with us. And advanced speech to text and speech recognition systems, because right now we're kind of limited in handling different accents, handling different languages. There's a lot of work that needs to go on here. But all of that is kind of next generation stuff. And a lot of that is behind the scenes. So we desperately need you AI folks to help us work on the next generation. But right now, there's not a lot of it. And most importantly, and this is something I want people to clearly understand, if you are not an AI person, you don't need to know much about AI to build conversations. The conversational UI that we talk about and that we're using does not need an extensive understanding of machine models and complex algorithms and any of this stuff. So you're probably asking, well, okay, if I don't need to be a machine learning expert, what do I need to do in order to build the conversations, to build the user interface? That goes into what we refer to as the voice UI designer and the conversation designer. And surprisingly, if you are learning how to be a graphical UI designer and how to build graphical interfaces, you're actually already learning a lot of what you need to know. And some of that's going to apply, when you're building the interfaces in Android and building the interfaces for an interactive canvas. But even more so is this gives you some of the skills and knowledge to map out how a conversation is going to progress, to understand what the best phrases are going to be that people will use at their end of the conversation, and what kinds of responses, what kinds of audio responses, what does the script need to be that we respond with them. And even more importantly, when users start digging themselves into a hole, when they start going off in directions that we don't necessarily understand or expect them to go into, how do we make our conversations steer them back into the path that we want them to be? And surprisingly, there are a lot of similarities between designing a graphical user interface and designing a conversation. One of the things we talk about a lot when we talk about designing conversations is thinking about what the persona of that conversation is. How do we want to represent our end of the conversation? And in a lot of ways, that's like saying, well, how do we determine what the color and the layout and the graphical styling is going to be when we build a website or a web app? Some of that's constrained by the technology or dimensions, but other things are, how do we want to represent what we're trying to show? When we're talking a visual user interface, that means a choice of color, means a choice of graphics, means layout. When we're talking audio, when we're talking conversation, it gets reflected in what voices are we choosing to use, what attitude, what phrases are we using to come up with. In some cases, it means what audio icons or ear cons do we need to use to represent what we're doing and to call attention to things that we're trying to say. So a lot of the skills that you've already developed as a visual UI designer will carry over into the voice UI design arena. One thing that I really, really want to make sure gets called out is, I know this is an incredibly important field when we talk about identity, security, and privacy. Overall, I did identity, I did security for a number of years. I'm an identity GDE. This is an incredibly important field, and I have amazing respect for all of you who are looking to get into this really, really challenging field. That said, when it comes to voice, we've got some interesting complexities around what's going on here. In addition to all of the usual identity, security, and privacy issues that come up when we deal with programming, one of the things we have to remember is that voice is very, very personal. These assistants are almost like having a person that's with you all of the time. Good assistants will do things like learn the habits of how you're using a particular application. In some ways, maybe try to anticipate what you're doing. Certainly, they have knowledge about what you're doing with that application itself. And when we start getting that kind of understanding, when we get that kind of context, we need to make sure we respect it very, very carefully. Because otherwise, the best thing that could happen is that we just lose the user's trust in us. The worst thing that can happen is we lose their information. And that's far too dangerous a thing to happen. So please, I'm imploring those of you that are doing things with identity and privacy and security, pay attention to the voice arena because it's an important field that's growing. Now, on that front, Google does provide a number of security and safety features. So there are ways that we do make sure that information gets contained within a single action, that actions can't leak information to other ones. We also allow for ways that people can sign into something just using their voice. And Google provides a lot of tools that let us do that and let us link to accounts that we may already have established with them on the web or on mobile through what's called account linking. So there are a lot of tools that are out there already and a lot more that need to be developed and a lot more attention that we need to be able to pay to them. Now, I have a funny feeling that there's a bunch of people that are out there that are saying right now, you know what, fine, do whatever you want. I'm just going to take my goggles and I'm going to put them on and I'm just going to ignore all this voice stuff because it doesn't apply to me at all. Well, I've got news for you. Voice is both buzzword compliant and it's fully metaverse compatible. So what do I mean by that? Well, basically, voice is an ideal way to control the world around you. It's a way that we can do things like issue commands, get that additional feedback, get the information that we need to help us make sense of an immersive universe. It's far easier and far better in a lot of ways than trying to come up with gestures that don't necessarily reflect reality, whereas voice is something that reflects reality. So I encourage you, as you're building out your augmented reality, as you're building out your virtual reality tools, look into voice. Look into how voice controls can improve the experience in the AR, VR, and metaverse worlds. I think this is an exciting field that not a lot of people are really focusing on right now, but I think we're going to be seeing more and more about it as people really begin to understand the power of voice and how it can help us out in all of these environments. Now, there's also a subset of you that are like, this software, who cares? Give me some hardware. I don't want to deal with the illusionary world. I want to deal with the real world where I have devices that I can work with. And I think what we've been learning over the past 5 and 7 years is that voice is a fantastic way to control these hardware devices and to control the Internet of Things. It's far, far better than trying to open up a web app and get to the right screen and punch the right buttons. And the good news is that the Google Assistant provides for a special API that allows you to register these devices, their traits, the device types, and that a user can then access them using a very, very natural set of commands. So instead of having to swipe and open an app and do stuff to turn on a light, I can just walk into a room and say, hey, G, turn on the living room lights. And it figures out which lights are the living room lights, which manufacturers are each lights, which commands need to be sent to where to turn on those lights. And some of the good news is that we're even making some of this very, very local. So now it used to be where you'd issue a command, that command would be sent to a server, that server would send the command down to your local devices. Now, increasingly, if it can, it uses what's known as the local home SDK. So you issue a command to your Google Assistant, and it runs it directly on one of the local devices on the network. This really increases the speed for response, and it increases the security. So all of that, a lot of things that I said there, really packed a lot of information in. But what I hope you've gotten out of this is that we need you. We need the skills that you're learning now. We need the skills that you've already learned. We need the experiences that you have, whether as an Android developer, a web developer, if you're in the cloud, if you're doing machine learning, if you're doing stuff with AR, VR, with security, with hardware, with design, all of the skills that you have right now will help us in the voice world. They're skills that you have, they're skills that you're learning, and all of them will apply to voice. I want you to bring them to voice. I hope you can. So, but one thing you need to know is that it's just the start. There are new things that you need to learn as part of voice itself. There are lots of details that I haven't gone over that you'll need to learn as you bring them in. To learn those, the best place to start is Google's developer website. That's developers.google.com/assistant. There you'll find all the information you need about designing conversational actions, building app actions, building stuff with hardware and IoT, building smart home devices. All of that stuff is available at the website. You should also follow Actions on Google and Twitter. They've got regular announcements there about what's new, what's being released, and just talking about stuff that is out there that you may have missed. When you have questions, I encourage you to post them on Stack Overflow using the Actions on Google tag. Both Google staff and a number of GDEs follow that tag. And usually we can not necessarily answer your questions quickly, but certainly help you work through them and try to figure out the problems that you have. I also would love to field some of your questions right now. But also, once this is over, I encourage you to find me and ask me questions. As I said, I've got weekly office hours where I encourage people to ask questions and we have conversations. I announce all of those at Twitter. You can find my YouTube channel for Two Voice Devs at, unsurprisingly, Two Voice Devs, or search whatever podcast you like using for Two Voice Devs. That's a weekly podcast. And again, we cover all fields when it comes to voice development. And finally, you'll be able to find this presentation, other presentations, and other stuff where I talk about voice at prisoner.com/UBI. So at this point, I'm done. Again, I want to thank all of you for having me here. I encourage any questions that you have. And thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Alan. It was an absolutely amazing presentation. I loved every minute of it. You have so much excitement when you share with us all the details. Yeah, you
Thank
definitely
you.
convinced me.
That's fantastic because, I really am passionate about voice. As I said on one of the earliest slides, I think voice is a transformational technology. We've seen how the web was transformational, how mobile's transformational. I think voice is a truly, truly transformational technology that will that lets people do things in ways that we never had before. And we're just beginning to understand how some of those things will actually take place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And we are totally awesome. And in the meantime, I want to remind the audience that if you have any question, feel free to throw it into the chat and we'll address them for sure. Or if you just want to say hi, do that too. And yeah, definitely your presentation really showed me a lot of horizons and clarification of where the opportunities lie for smart assistants, which I think it was kind of vague for me before, right? I kind of know there's a lot of opportunities, but not exactly where it is. Yeah. All right. So there's the first question we have. How do you think smart assistant would go in the future?
That's a good question, Spencer. So I think there are lots of. I think the biggest thing to kind of understand about where they're going to go is they're going to go everywhere. So we see a lot of people talking, for example, about what the role of a smart assistant in the car is going to be, and what car specific functions we need as in a smart assistant, but also what general things we need in a smart assistant that just happen to be in a car. So, what what does that look like? How is a car's smart assistant need to be different than the smart assistant we may have in our kitchen? I think we're also going to see smart assistants increasingly understand that kind of context better. So understand the context of place. Are we asking this question in a car? Are we asking it in a kitchen? Are we asking it when we're watching TV? Sometimes our answers to our questions may be a little bit different for each one, but also better context of who is asking the question, and have they asked that kind of a question before, or have they asked similar questions, and how do those questions all relate to each other. And I think that's important because then we can really start getting into conversations. So if I ask a question about where the nearest pizzeria is, well, you know that's a little different if I'm thinking about what to order and standing in my house, or if I'm in a car looking for a pizzeria. And then if I ask what's on their menu, or how much their prices are, or what their hours are, or what does a conversation around those things look like? And if every week I start asking about where the nearest pizzeria is, and then I start, placing an order, how much can it anticipate? How much should it anticipate? So there are ethical questions around that as well. So, and all of these are really a complex set of things to understand, to start making for complicated or complex assistance. And I think also we're going to see these assistants appearing as part of new devices that are helping us more subtly. So, for example, what would an assistant that's part of a wearable be like? If the assistant is sitting in our earbuds, can our earbuds monitor our pulse, our temperature? If they are doing those sorts of things, what kind of health information can and should they be warning us about? If we've told it that we're going for a run and it's noticed we're going for a run, do we want our assistants to say your pulse rate is really high? Or knowing that when we're done for a run, monitor our pulse rate and say your recovery period's not so good? Do we want our assistants doing that? And if so, how do we do that with the right level of being not being obtrusive, but doing it to the right degree that we want it to? So there are more questions than answers when it comes to voice and smart assistants these days, and these are just some of the challenges that we're looking at. So I'm really excited to see where all of these are going in the smart assistant space. Um, we just had a conference called Voice 2021, and one of the challenges in all of them are, we understand weather, we understand music, we understand smart home control reasonably well. What's next with voice? What are the challenges that we don't fully understand yet that will really help the smart assistant grow up?
Yeah, I think there's still so many questions. You're right. And then there's still so many ideas and discussions that we can go with a smart assistant, right? And then I really like one of the point you brought up, which is ethics. And I'm glad you brought it up because I think this is like one of the topic that um is pretty common when people talk about smart assistants, right? So there's commonly two groups of people who love to have as many smart assistants as possible inside their house in their daily lives, whereas there's another group that feel like they are having their privacy being taken away. So do you think if one day we have smart assistants so good that it can have long conversations with us rather than just one question and one answer as we're having right now. Do you think it will be something that's hard for the users to take? What's your opinion on this topic?
So I've got a number of them there. And one thing that I will say is there's two organizations that I work with to various degrees that are carefully working on this sort of thing. One is called the Open Voice Network, OVON, and they have a number of committees that are working with both industry and with individuals, trying to make sure we understand the privacy and ethical application of these devices. And they're doing fantastic work, and the work they're doing is very important. And it's also a topic that comes up a lot in another group that I take part in called Voice Lunch. And this is a group of people that are in the voice industry who just meet casually every week, sometimes a couple of times every week, to talk about different topics in voice. And the privacy and security topics are almost at the forefront of a lot of what we talk about. So it's an important topic. And it's one that I think, to our credit, we're addressing up front. We're not waiting for years down the line to say, oh, well, we should have thought about that. Even both Amazon and Google, two of the ones that are pushing these smart devices, have thought very carefully right up front, what does a privacy policy look like? What does it mean when users are trusting us with their voice? How do we help them understand what they're trusting us with? How do we help them understand what we do with that data? And there's been some success to that, and some not so good success. Early on, we certainly had people who, we certainly had indications that recordings were being sent out of the country and listened to, and nobody was quite sure why that was happening. So I think increasingly we're helping people understand that, and hopefully we are enabling their trust in using it. What I see more and more are that people who have these devices in their homes and use them understand both the risks of having them there and the benefits. And they see the benefits far outweighing the risks. And I'm not saying there's no risk, because there is, but there's also a risk to having a phone in our pocket. The phone that we have has a microphone as well. And what assurances do we have that that microphone is not listening to us all the time? There are people that think that it is. So in the same way that I think we need to help them understand what a phone can do and the privacy issues surrounding the use of that phone, I think we need to help people understand and be comforted by the risks and safeguards that are in place when it comes to smart speakers and smart displays. And I will say, when I got my first one, I was concerned. I now have them throughout my house. And I have them throughout my house because I've learned and understand exactly how the audio does get picked up by them and used by them. And I'm comforted by the controls that are in place. So do I think people will use them more and more? I think we're seeing kids perfectly comfortable with them now. We're even seeing older adults who are used to carrying on conversations, who may have trouble with seeing displays or seeing keyboards and using touch screens, very quickly got comfortable with it and are very reassured by how the audio works for them.
Yeah, I agree. I think more and more people are getting themselves educated when they use any kind of technologies, right? And I think this is not applying for smart assistant only, but for anything really. Just don't be innocent user.
Yep.
Yeah.
I do have to say, I'm glad people are asking the question, because we were not very challenging when we brought smartphones into our lives, and we weren't very challenging when we brought the web into our life. So I am glad that people are asking some of these hard questions when it comes to voice. I hope, however, they're understanding the answers, and I hope we're helping them understand the answers, and that reassures them because I can speak for myself. I'm very reassured for where voice technology is now and is going.
Yeah, and I guess we're hearing from a smart assistant expert, right? So if you are rest assured that it is going into the very safe direction, I think that's a pretty good um, evidence
Well,
for us.
but also keep in mind,
Yeah.
yes, I'm an expert. Yes, I get into this technology a lot, but I'm also heavily invested in this. I have a bias, and I'm not going to deny that I have a bias for this. So I want to see this technology everywhere.
Hmm.
Um, so understand that I have a bias, but I understand the concern, and I think that that helps us make technology that is safer and that does respect our privacy. Because I'll be honest, I'm worried about my privacy too.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And there's no 100% safety anywhere for any kind of technologies, really. So, yeah, there's gonna be questions, but I guess this is personal decision, right? You're gonna have to choose either um, the convenience that it brings versus the security, and then just best protect yourself, I
Yep.
guess.
And again, one of the risky things is that the more information we trust it with,
Hmm.
the better it can do things for us.
Hmm.
And there are going to be times that that's uncomfortable. There are going to be times that we don't want it to know all of this about us. And the trade-off is that it's not going to be able to be as effective for us. And that's okay. We need to be able to design systems where um, every time a user speaks to us, it's going to be like the first time they speak to us.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, that system also needs to be prepared that if we've seen this user 100 times, that we understand how to work with them. And
Mm,
that's a complicated system to build sometimes.
sounds
But
like, yeah.
it makes for a much better system. And we're getting better at understanding how to do that correctly.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And if you're using any kind of smart assistant, I think you notice that the quality is improving every day and you start to have more and more smooth experience. Um, yeah.
I
And
hope so anyway.
yeah. And speaking of this, developing and improving smart assistants. So let's say if I'm a student and I'm very interested in smart assistants. And like you say, there's different fields, right? Different subfields for me to get involved. But what do you think is if there's a general advice that you can give for any tech students, how they can get started?
So again, and what I hope you've gotten out of this presentation is that if there are things that you're already interested in or already good with, start there. If you already enjoy developing Android apps, or you already have, if you've developed a few and you're comfortable doing that, look into app actions. Look into how to extend shortcuts so they can work with voice. Learn into how to extend an Android widget so that it works with voice. Start with something that you already know and learn how to extend it. If you're more familiar with building web apps or building APIs in the cloud, start there. Start with a conversational action and learn what it takes to design conversations and how to hook that up to the APIs that you're already familiar with. One of the things I always encourage anybody is that if there is the best way to learn something is to do a project that interests you. So don't try to come up with the abstract weather app because I've got this API and I can do a weather app. Are you interested in another weather app? Do you feel you have something that you can contribute that's different? If you do, fantastic, build it. If you don't, find the thing that you are interested in and passionate about and build from there. You know, if I am interested, for example, um, if I love trivia or if I'm a trivia expert, maybe I want to build a trivia game. What does a trivia game sound like? What is having, what does that conversation sound like? How do we keep score? How do we report on score? If one of the things I love to do are databases, well, okay, I've got databases with information. How do I hook that up so that I can query databases using my voice or put more information into the database using my voice? Um, if I love BigQuery, for example, well, okay, what sorts of big queries do I want to do? And what does it make sense to ask about them with voice? So think of places where you're already familiar with some technology, maybe not quite familiar enough with it. So it gives you a little opportunity to grow. But how can I take these things so that I can walk into a room and ask a question that I want to ask and have it answered for me and then build from there? So if you're interested, all of the information is again available on the website, on Google's website, developers.google.com/assistant. Always a great place to start. And then as you run into problems, post them on Stack Overflow, post them on Twitter, and tag me, and we'll work through the problems. So, uh, start where you're comfortable, start on a topic that you want to explore more, and then use these other tools to build from there.
Absolutely. I think that it's the best way to learn any new technology, right? You've got to have something that you are interested in, and that gets you, it gives you the fun feeling, right? And
Right.
yeah,
It's what is your passion? What
true.
is it, because, you know, anything else, that's a school assignment. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
even when you're out of school, that's an assignment.
Mm-hmm.
What, if you want to learn something, relate it to something that for you is fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that'll give you a little bit more motivation to play with this tech and play with it. One of the great things about the tools with voice is that all of this stuff is free to start with. It's free to experiment with. There's no charges for doing a lot of this stuff. So it's easy to jump in and just fiddle and explore. And if you like fiddling and exploring, it's a great way to do it. And if you like reading, there's documentation. If you like watching, there are YouTube videos and podcasts all around about how to do all of this stuff. So find the ways that work for you.
Mm-hmm.
The content is out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm telling you, you have created a new fan today. I was a little curious. I was already interested in voice before, but today after your conversation, it reminds me that smart assistant is not about voice only. There are other opportunities, right? And then it's not just web, it's cloud, it's Android, there's lots of opportunities. So I'm definitely gonna check out the website and I think I'll
Fantastic.
find something. Absolutely.
And I really sincerely do look forward to your questions and to carrying on these sorts of conversations elsewhere. Because, again, it's all about conversations.
Yeah.
You know, one of the great things about being in this community is that we all understand it's still pretty new. We
Mm,
all like talking
mm.
because that's voice. See how
Right.
it kind of works that way? Um, so when we do get together at conferences, at the weekly voice lunch meetings, we like talking and sharing and
Hmm.
learning from what other people's experiences are.
Hmm.
So I look forward to having those conversations more with you in the future.
Absolutely. And I would love for you to, if you can come to our campus and perhaps have a workshop or something,
Someday
a lot
soon, I
of.
hope.
Yes, and I know there are a lot of AI and machine learning students from my school, and they're super interested in these topic as well. So that's very, very exciting. And then, if there's any last questions from the audience, feel free to throw it in. And in the meantime, there's one last question I have for you, which I noticed that you are wearing your a Google Glass, right?
Yes.
So, do you want to share with us your experience about it a little bit, if you can?
Sure. So, once upon a time, I was also a GDE for Google Glass. I've been working with Glass now for um, almost, I think I'll be coming up on 9 years, 10 years, 9 or 10 years. I need to actually check how long it's been. Um, I got involved with Glass when it was first announced. And again, similar to voice, I was struck by how Glass was trying to do things that hadn't been done before in the industry. So it kind of approached computing with a new attitude, whereas before we were, burying our faces behind a phone or staring at a TV. Glass had the attitude of, we want to get you out in the world. Glass needs to be there to support you when you want it, but when you don't want it, it needs to be out of the way. So our motto was there when you need it and out of the way when you don't. And it was trying things like an early voice interface, some early gesture controls, and a display that kind of sits off to the side, letting you do things like send and receive text messages just with your voice, or dictate messages just with your voice, or take pictures just with your voice, or very quickly. So instead of having to pull out a phone and unlocking the phone and opening the camera and aiming it and getting just so, I'd push a button and the picture was taken and I could get on with what I was doing. If I got a notification, instead of pulling out the phone and unlocking it and swiping down to see who the notification was from, I'd glance quickly in the corner of my eyes, see who it was from. If it was something I could reply to, I could say, send a reply and dictate a reply, and it would be done. If it was something I didn't care about, I'd ignore it and get on with what I was doing, so I could ignore it in half a second. If it was something that was important, then I could say, okay, I need to pull out my phone and come up with a longer response. So it put me more in control of how I wanted to handle things. And that was a really, really powerful concept to me at the time. And as we were designing apps for Glass, what we called glassware, we were learning how to do these sorts of things. How do we let people be more in control of what they were doing, of their notifications, of how they wanted to interact with technology versus how they wanted to live in the world around them. And my experiences with Glass led me directly to what I do with voice now and helping people understand how to build for voice and how voice is different than what we've ever done before. So very much Glass was a major influence on me, and I still love Glass. I still am hoping that someday will come out. Google will release the next generation of it. Not very optimistic, but I think it showed us all that technology did not have to be immersive, that technology was there to serve us, not us serving
Serving
technology.
technology. Absolutely. Yeah, you got me so excited. Yeah, for sure.
Great! Fantastic!
Yep, I'm gonna bother you with so many questions from now on. And I hope the same from the audience. So if you guys started to pick up any smart assistant, any voice project from today, please connect with Alan and let me know too. And let Alan know so then we know that something come out of this. And hopefully, Alan, this is not the last event we have with you. Hopefully, you will come back in the future.
I am more than happy to come back and talk about where voice is going. Um, Maybe get into some specifics at some point, and I really do hope I can come out and visit you there
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
do some workshops with you.
Absolutely. Yep. And then for the audience, in case you missed it, Alan's YouTube channel and podcast is called Two Voice Devs. And then check out his spiders.com. And then there's prisoner.com. And then his Twitters, A Firstenberg, right? And
You got it?
Your your LinkedIn is Alan Firstenberg. And then it's on the screen. So once again, thank you everyone for being here and spending your time with us. And thanks again, Alan. You're awesome. I hope to see you again.
Thank you for having me. It was great to see everybody. I really look forward to talking with you about it. As you've noted, I'm really passionate about it.
Mhm.
So I look forward to sharing that passion more with you, and I hope to hear what you're doing and what's exciting you about this space as well. Thanks again.
Thanks again. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah.